Welcome to the Spiritual Voice, where Spirit speaks through everything and everyone. Together we learn from masters from all walks of life to explore spirituality through direct experience so you can create a life of clarity and abundance. I'm your host, Pol Cousineau, transformational leader, tuning in with you every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. You can learn more about our global spiritual community by visiting thespiritualvoice.com. Hello and welcome to The Spiritual Voice. We have an amazing guest today, like every show actually, and the topic that we're going to be engaging with, at least at first, is mindfulness. And mindfulness is something that got introduced in my life a few years ago, and I have to admit that I was actually not very enthused by it. It didn't sound like it was something that great. I had so much going on, and I mean, back then I was also playing video games, watching movies, all these things, and mindfulness didn't sound very appealing to me. That being said, it's interesting how things work out, because once I actually decided to engage with the practice, and for me it was more through yoga, where at first it was like a very mechanical yogic practice, and I was just doing it for the sports of it. And then one of my teachers was like really starting to talk to me about breathing and becoming aware of what was going on in each of the postures. And he said, well, asana, and the asana is like each of the different postures, is seat of observation. I was like, what do you mean seat of observation? And then that started really a process of discovering how much can I be aware of what's happening in my life to myself internally and what's happening in the world around me, and how sometimes maybe I'm not doing that. And to make a nice loop around it, I actually don't play video games anymore. And not that there's anything in particular wrong with it, just for me, it was triggering my addictive personality. And I find that I'm able to be engaged with the world and with myself by being very mindful, conscious, and aware of what's really happening. And this is sufficient for me, and it doesn't trigger my addictive personality. So I also appreciate that, because otherwise it could take me down in holes of like 50, 60 hours plus of gaming a week, and I'm sure that wasn't that too much good for me. Now, I do want to invite you to check out the website, The Spiritual Voice, and there you're going to find several resources to help you along. And one of them is other podcasts, like the one that we're featuring today. And you're also going to be finding the Essential Spiritual Toolkit for busy people in a fast-paced world. And I also extend an invitation to check out our community, where we're learning to build fulfilling relationship and injecting meaning in this virtual world. We have weekly seminars on a monthly theme, and we also have weekly short meditations that you can actually fit inside of a coffee break, which is pretty amazing. So check out thespiritualvoice.com. And now I want to lead with the introduction of Brian King. Also, Brian Raking for search engine optimization purposes. And I just had to bring that in because I think it's actually pretty funny, but it's true. And he's a specialist in resilience and mindfulness. I had the pleasure of having a conversation with him a few weeks ago, and I was absolutely delighted about not only his personality, but his message, as well as the work that he's doing and how he's able to bring this at a very practical level. And without any more further ado, or I don't know, I was going to say something really smooth and nice sounding, but hey, it's pretty rough here. So welcome to the Spiritual Voice, Brian.
It's a pleasure to be here, Paul. And I just want to piggyback on you're saying that you no longer do video games because of what it does to you. I'm in exactly the same boat. I didn't like the emotions that stirred up, the frustration, the anger, and I realized, this is not how I want to be in the world. So bye-bye video games.
I think that's interesting that we have that point in common, because I didn't know that you used to be playing video games, and it's hilarious because for me, I say that it was probably one of the main focuses of my life. Like, if I assess how much time I was spending into that and other activities, I think it even beats sleep.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time. This was back when I had a job I really didn't like, and I got one of the first Xboxes and different video games where I was shooting this, that, and the other thing, and I released a lot of frustration. And what I didn't realize at the time was that the need to play video games was an indication that there were other parts of my life that really needed my attention. And I was using the video games to distract myself instead of dealing with the things that really needed to be dealt with.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. But when that was happening, were you actually realizing it, that that's what was going on? Or how did you come to that realization?
I realized it more so when my oldest boy entered school, when he entered first grade. He was having so many challenges. All three of my boys have autism and ADHD. And when I realized that my ability to be there for him, to be patient, to be compassionate, was difficult when I was leaving the day job where I was exhausted because of all the stuff I had to deal with. And that's when I first began contemplating opening up my own shop, because I had a license to do clinical therapy. So I absolutely had legal right to counsel on my own. And when realizing I needed more flexibility to be there for him, I decided to make the leap. And that was about 10 years ago. And I've been self-employed ever since.
That is awesome that he helped you make that leap. At least that's how I'm perceiving it. And how did that change your interaction with him?
I was much more available to him because I could set my own hours. If I needed to start later because he needed a little bit more TLC in the morning, I could do that. If I needed to cut my day short to be there after school to help him transition from school to home, I could do that. I was absolutely more available to attend meetings at the school to try and figure out how to best support him in that space. The flexibility alone was an absolute gift, considering how difficult a time he was having.
Right. And I mean, I can only imagine as going back as a young boy, knowing that your father did this decision reveals a certain importance. And I feel in the adolescence, it's like, well, is my life important? What is this for? And, what is my value in the world? And I see this as a strong affirmation that, yes, you matter and you have a reason to be here.
You're absolutely correct. I mean, there's one thing that I make sure I communicate to my boys is that they are the most important thing to me. It's not to say that my life doesn't have balance, because there are a lot of things I put my energy into. But when they need something from me, beginning with my attention, with my listening, with my compassion, they know they're going to get it. And I think one of the reasons why each of my boys likes to take certain risks, healthy risks, to grow, to think in new ways, it's because they know that I'm going to be there to support them and not criticize them.
Which is completely different, right? Support and criticism. But then where do we draw the fine line when they need guidance?
Well, see, there are so many lessons available to you. When you take action, you get results every single time, whether they're the results you want or not. And simply reflecting upon those results is where the lesson lies. The lesson doesn't lie in me giving them a lecture about what they should have done, what they could have done, what they did wrong. They simply need to measure the results they got against the ones they wanted. So you can have a very introspective, reflective dialogue, and the answers kind of emerge. So I don't have to sit there and judge and criticize. I just need to help them reflect and explore.
Well, that sounds pretty sweet to me, although you still have to be able to notice and see, oh, wait, this result is because of these different actions, or this is why it's actually happening. So have you done anything to guide them in that process of being able to, add things up or have that feedback loop?
Yeah, there are times where you can tell they're resisting the reflection. If they took some things personally, or they are being hard on themselves, or if they're just matters of safety. They're going to do things that I think, man, you're really going to hurt yourself if you do that. And I'll come right out and tell them, let me tell you why you shouldn't do that. Or let me tell you why you should rethink that. So it's not to say that I never give direction explicitly, but I try to save that for last, if they're not getting it. Because one thing our system really doesn't do, some parenting styles, and especially the school system, is we don't teach our kids decision making. We don't teach them how to weigh the facts and use their judgment. We teach them to memorize and regurgitate for tests. And a lot of parents like to save themselves the time and just tell their kids what to do. And when you're trying to raise people to go in a society that requires innovation, creativity, in order to prepare them for that, you must teach them how to think, how to process, how to make decisions. But absolutely, there are times when you need to step in and say, hold on, soldier, don't do that. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think it's important to have like a good picture, right, of how that plays out. And I'm just thinking, it's like, eat your dinner because it's going to get cold and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, obviously, when, let's say I take myself, when I eat the dinner, I'm realizing now that it got cold because I took my sweet time, So it's like, well.
Yeah, my kid's being very scattered, with the ADHD, especially in the morning. The youngest one, I really need to stay after him to make sure that he gets everything done before the bus gets here. Fortunately, the older two are beyond that. There were the years where I did stay after them, and now they have a routine that's so solid that they pretty much get up, get things done, and get out the door without my having to do anything. So I'm moving the youngest one to that point where he will be very self-determined and he'll be able to do the same.
Right. And that's what's good, is that to the point where he's going to be able to do the same. And then, removing those dependencies. You talked just briefly about our society requiring innovation and creativity. Well, again, if we just memorize stuff, then we have a dependency to the system, and we're not necessarily in a position to strive in that environment.
Yeah, nowadays, and one of the big ways that our education system is antiquated is they're expecting our kids to memorize things that they could find in 5 seconds by doing a Google search. It's not necessary to memorize these things anymore. It's pointless to use up your brain memorizing things that are so accessible. Our brains should be used now for creativity. And unfortunately, that's the one thing that they're taking out of schools. Music, art, shop class. That's the stuff the world needs, but that's what they're cutting out. It totally makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's very interesting how what I also value as very useful. If you're not able to be creative, then how are you going to be as well building the life that you really want? Otherwise you're just going to be, seeing things and you're going to say, oh, okay, I like that, I want that. And now it's bringing me the reflection of the consumerism approach, right? Which is pretty much that. I like this, I'm going to get it, but we're not necessarily being having the skills to assess, well, what do I want on my own? Let's say there's nothing else around me and I'm left to my own. What do I want? Figure that out and then go out and get it, instead of looking at the external world to tell us what are the options and then picking in between those.
Yeah, there are people who don't know what they want because they're too busy trying to please everyone. I work with people constantly who really don't know what makes them happy because their whole life has been spent doing what the teacher wants, doing what their parents want, doing what their college instructors told them they should focus on. And they don't take any time to ask themselves, what'll make me happy? And they spend a lot of time doing the job they're supposed to, having the house they're supposed to, and yet they feel this big hole, this lack of meaning, because no one ever sat them down and said, what makes you happy? What do you want to do? And that's missing in a lot of people's lives.
Well, even when you're mentioning that right now, I'm thinking of, you that might be listening and thinking, well, what will make you happy? What do you actually want, and what will bring joy in your life? And asking yourself this question, even right now, and considering it, like, is that something that and if yes, what is it? And I'd be curious to know, Brian, like, have you always known that, or how did that evolve, if not, for you?
It evolved because over time, with all the different things I had cancer when I was 18. I grew up struggling in school because I had undiagnosed learning disabilities. My ex-wife, she left me for another man, and it was just me and my boys, and I was a single dad, and all those hurts really compelled me to reflect because through all those years when I had cancer and my friends stopped talking to me because they couldn't handle it, I kept thinking, man, I did all these things for them. I was so good to them. I was a good friend. They're not here for me. When my wife left, I gave her everything. I was the best husband ever. So in both of those times, I had to reflect and say, man, I did so many things for other people. I expected reciprocity, didn't get it. Maybe it's time that I start thinking about what makes me happy instead of always putting my energy into other people who, for whatever reason, aren't going to reciprocate. So that's really when I discovered the value of really introspecting. And what I found out through all of that is when I do what makes me happy, not in a selfish way, okay? Not in an indulging way, but do what makes me happy in terms of what do I want to create? What do I want to make happen in this world? That I find I am more fulfilled and people's lives benefit more because I'm coming from that place of creativity instead of just focusing on completing the tasks that will get approval and avoid criticism.
Yes, I'm soaking that in as you're saying it, and I can feel that. But then you said the indulgence piece. So how do we know if we're stepping into overindulgence, right? Where is that line?
Well, indulgence is much more materialistic. You're looking for those temporary fixes. You want the latest thing because it's exciting. You are distracting yourself by going to see a movie or going to buy something new. And it's not to say that those things don't have their purpose. We have different ways of rewarding ourselves when we're successful, but meeting all the needs that way, people, the worst case scenarios are the hoarders. They have more and more stuff because they just can't fill that void. So I guess the bottom line of it is when you're looking for fulfillment outside yourself exclusively, that's a problem. If you're able to generate something from inside yourself and manifest it outside yourself, that's a much more healthy approach to it.
And I like that you say exclusively. It's not like one reality denies the other one. So let's go a little bit more deeply into how do you generate that from within yourself. And I have a hunch that it's probably tied to mindfulness as well in the introduction that we had about that general topic.
Yeah, I've been practicing meditation for 20 years, maybe a little over 20 years. And when you spend a lot of time just watching what's happening inside yourself, the experiences you're creating, there's that chatter that comes from your primitive mind that's trying to protect you, to keep you alive. That's all the negative stuff. Don't do that. Be careful. And too often we can get caught up in that and think that that's a mirror of the world because it chatters so much. Because the primary obligation of our brain is to keep us alive. But it can derail us from happiness because we think that's the priority. The safety is the priority. But we also have to have the opportunity for growth, where we take some risks, we step outside our comfort zone, we experiment, we explore. And that's where the creation takes place. It's in that curious mind, that sense of wonder, that what if I do this and let's see what happens. So it's following those cues, that curious part of you, and realizing that you can be curious without being in danger. And even if you do get hurt a little bit, if you're still alive, you can learn from that. Learn that, well, maybe I want to take a different approach next time, as opposed to, oh, heck, I'm never doing that again. But just entertaining that sense of wonder and maintaining it. That's really the fertilizer for creativity and discovery.
Yeah, but then I can see the challenge because we talked earlier about creativity, the artistic side not being cultivated necessarily by what I'll call the system. And I just had to throw in a little bit of that sound effect, but it really is. So then, let's say I'm 20 or 23 years old, and then now this is actually going back to my own story, but it's like that was not cultivated. And then I find the video games, in my particular example, I'm sure gaming is quite popular still. That robs us, I feel, of that. Well, how do we take that step to say, yeah, I am creative. I want to explore. I want to grow when I feel there's like a strong numbing of that. Or even it's like, well, that's something that others have, but I don't like. I really did not consider myself as a creative person. For me, that was one of the known facts of my universe.
Well, one thing that's helpful to point out to people is that they create their perception of reality. And one of the easiest ways to tap into that is when they say, oh, that was terrible for this and this reason. Or I was just speaking with a client this morning who believes that his mother-in-law doesn't like him, although there was no indication whatsoever given by her that she doesn't like him. And what it came down to is it's his own self-concept that he's projecting upon her. And I basically said, you could tell yourself a lot of stories. Why is that the one you went with? Why did you decide to create that experience of your relationship with your mother-in-law? When my boys get negative, that was terrible, or this person's a jerk because of this. And I ask him, why are you deciding to go with that? Why give so much energy to this one person that it consumes your mood for the day? And reflecting upon that, yeah, you're a wonderful creator. You're a great storyteller. You tell yourself stories all day long about what happened, what it meant. And when you realize that you are absolutely in charge, and this is key for your listeners, you are absolutely in charge of whether you even tell a story to begin with. There are so many things that don't need to upset us throughout the day because we can just say, oh, that was interesting, and move on to the next moment because you reserve the right to not tell yourself a story about what happened.
Yeah, that's actually a very good observation that you don't have to tell yourself a story. And one of the things that I found for me is using a slight sound helps me cut through that. Because let's say I'm going through traffic and well, actually, no, I'm going to pick something that's a little bit more relevant. So I was having different bouts of insomnia recently. And then it's like I'm going through that in the middle of the night and I'm shifting and tossing. And then I woke up and I was like, wow, like I just feel horrible. And then already, right, I feel horrible. Now, this was like the start of the train of those thoughts. And then for me, just letting out like a sound helps to cut through those thoughts. So it might just be like a sigh. And that example was like, oh. And just that helped clear out like all of the crap that was happening in my mind. But if I don't do any of that, then it just becomes like a snowball of some sort.
Yeah, when you do a sigh like that, it sounds like you're choosing something that you give your attention to.
Yes.
If you are a meditator of any way and you're used to watching your breath, by doing that, you're interrupting that pattern of this is horrible, I feel horrible, because you're deciding to pay attention to something else. So it's like a reset. So that's very good advice. Maybe somebody that likes to exercise, they get on the floor and they do a bunch of sit-ups or push-ups or something. And because they've shifted their attention so dramatically, they've essentially given themselves a reset or a do-over. So little things like that can be a very accessible way to get yourself unstuck when you're in that negative storytelling.
I like that you mentioned the piece about the exercise, because I've had someone tell me, and he would do like a 30-second blitz of like jumping jacks or something like that. And then it would just totally shift things around. But I mean, especially if you're going really hard at it, I mean, it's hard to keep the story going while you're doing that. And let's say you do a sprint or anything that, really works your body.
And really requires you to pay attention. Because when you're doing, you're running, you got to make sure that you're concentrated on what you're doing so you don't twist your ankle or so you don't slip or run into something. When you're doing push-ups, there's a certain form you need to keep so you do it correctly and not hurt yourself. So any activity that really requires you to be there and be present with it is a wonderful way to get you unstuck.
So I want to go back a little bit to mindfulness itself. So what is that exactly?
Mindfulness is basically being absolutely present with the experience you're having, being very alert and paying attention as though you are a witness to it. You're watching it unfold and you're not telling yourself that judgmental story. So you're not saying, this is good, this is bad, that sucks, so I'd prefer this instead. You're just looking at it going, interesting how it's doing that. And instead of being a participant and impressing your judgment upon it, you're just watching it. You're just observing. Because a lot of the suffering that we cause ourselves is the result of that judgment. Telling ourselves this isn't good enough. This is unsatisfying. And then getting caught up in that feeling that life isn't good enough. That's where suffering comes from. As opposed to being grateful for the flowers that are outside your windows and say, man, I wonder when those things are going to bloom. Man, those things aren't growing as fast as I would like them to. But just looking at them as they are, right here and now, and saying, that's beautiful. That's probably my best explanation as to what mindfulness is.
It's a pretty good one, I have to say. And as it's certainly connecting to some of what we shared. And what I found too is when I started practicing mindfulness, it got way beyond like the cushion meditation, which is the first image that I had. And it's probably why it was so unappealing for my gaming mind. It's like, oh, no, that's the last thing I want to do. But there's actually a lot of different techniques that are considered mindfulness practices. Would you be able to just share some of maybe the broad categories, like some of them that are available to us?
Oh, but they're available in every moment of your life. It's a matter of being completely present with what you're doing. Eating is probably the next one. Because when you're eating something, you have to hold the fork or the spoon in a certain way. And you can feel the food as it touches your lips and your tongue for the first time. What's the temperature? What's the flavor? What's the texture? When you chew it slowly, feel the flavors change. And there's so much that's involved in that because, one of the unfortunate things is our culture teaches us to eat while we're doing something else. When you're at the dinner table, you're eating while you're catching up with each other on your day, or you're eating a TV dinner in front of the TV, or you're snacking while you're watching the football game. And eating just becomes something you do. It's a task throughout the day, when the reality is, it's a fantastic way to get in touch with your experience, get in touch with your body and the sensations that it's giving you. And because it's something you do throughout the day, it's a very accessible way to practice mindfulness.
That's a good example, because when you said it just becomes a task that you do throughout the day, it's making me reflect, well, so many things that we do can easily become a task or not. Like let's say you need to get somewhere. Well, driving your car or taking the commute can become a task, right? It's just something you need to do because you need to be in point B, and that's the only way. So now you're forced into this situation somehow, and well, I can't wait till I get there. But it can become something else. Like when I would get caught in these epic traffic jams. Well, epic, no, sorry, I take that back. I mean, just like an hour, right? So it's not epic, but in my perspective, it was epic. I'm saying that because I'm sure some listeners have like a maybe 2 to 4 hour commute and they're like, Paul, it's not an epic traffic jam.
Oh, yeah. And there are people that sit there and they just cuss like crazy. They take the traffic jam personally. Like, how dare you slow me down? What I have to get to is so important. Don't you understand? This has to get moving. And yeah, you can really make yourself miserable.
and several times a day, because normally it implies that you're going to do it at least twice. I mean, most days when you travel, you return to the original point.
But I think what you were alluding to is a stop sign is a wonderful opportunity to take a deep breath and get connected with your center again. When you're at a stoplight, which could last a minute or two, just take some time to check in with your breathing. Get connected to your center again. Take some deep breaths. Say thank you for this day. And then when the arrow comes on or the turns to green, then you proceed. But now you're in a much more centered place.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going, because I was so performance driven, with that big corp job, and there was such an importance to it. And I was certainly the place where I wouldn't stop working for eating. And then eventually I realized that this horrible traffic jam was actually one of the only times of the day where I had the opportunity, or where I felt I had the opportunity to rest. And then I started enjoying the traffic jam, because I was like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't get there any faster, so might as well just relax right now.
Absolutely. And being also very aware of, where do you have influence in what's happening? Can you influence the traffic jam? No, it's a fact. Traffic is slow or it's stopped. Where do I have influence? I have influence over my own state of mind, over my own experience of this moment. So what can I do to establish that? Get in touch with my breath.
Yeah, and if we go about life looking at the areas where we have influence, like the state of mind, well, then I think this is where we take back our power. What do you feel about that?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. Because whether we live in heaven or hell is completely up to us. There are people that look at all the negative. We've got wars and we've got crime and we've got this and life is terrible and the world's a dangerous place. And I look at them and say, why is that all you see? There are so many things taking place. There's generosity taking place through charities. There are people that are giving and loving and serving every single day. Why not pay attention to that? Why not find out how you can be part of that? So this world that also has suffering can also be counterbalanced with love and generosity.
I'm tempted to say, what do people answer to that?
They say, oh, good point. I don't know that all of them necessarily do something with that, but it's part of what I do and what I consider my mission to be, which is to help people move from suffering to love. That they don't have to spend all that time in that muck, the negativity, which, suffering is a part of the human experience, but it's not the entirety of our experience. And I want to help people learn that there is room for love, there's room for generosity. And sometimes suffering will show up, but that doesn't mean you've blown it. It just means you're human, you're having that human experience. And when suffering occurs, okay, it's happened. But if you want to transmute that, transform that into some experience of gratitude or an opportunity to be giving and loving, then suffering serves a very useful purpose. It gives you an opportunity to be helpful or reflective.
Yeah, I like the idea of moving from suffering to love, because that's certainly, although we may not necessarily fully comprehend it or understand it, it's still two concepts that are quite universal, right? I mean, this is something that I'm sure most of us listening can have at least an idea of what suffering is, at least for them, and an idea of what love is, although, we may be continually searching for, well, what is that exactly? But we have a general idea. So how do we take steps on that journey so that we are increasingly able to move from suffering to love?
Well, one of the first things to do is understand that mistakes aren't a failure. When things don't go your way, it doesn't mean you're incompetent or stupid. What it means is that you're experimenting. Because we are explorers of our experience. We're on a treasure hunt. We're looking for those moments where we can create something. But in order to create things, like they say, you can't make a cake without breaking some eggs. Anybody that's an inventor who's trying something that's never been done before, they have to fail on their way to success. They have to find all the things that don't work. in order to find the things that do work. So realizing that life is that treasure hunt and you are the hunter. You are looking for those things that are going to resonate with your spirit, that are most going to light you up. And it might be a journey that gives you some bumps and bruises, and you build up a little resilience along the way because of how many hits you've taken in order to get to what ultimately is going to fill you up. So be grateful for every bump and bruise because it means that you're doing some work, that you're on the journey, that you're moving forward. So relish it all.
Well, I get that. But then again, it's like there's something weird about those bumps where it's like the one that I can see coming. And it's like, okay, well, got to do something about it. I see that one coming. It's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. And then normally when you experience it, it may hurt, but it's normally not necessarily as bad. But all my being then starts to like act in a way that tries to prevent that from happening. And there almost seems to be I'm not sure that's the right word, but a fatalist approach where it's like, well, this is inevitably going to be happening. And now that I'm seeing that this pain is on its way, it just makes like life so much harder as I'm seeing this come up.
It can make life harder if you conclude that pain is going to be your primary experience. These bad things are coming. Life is going to hurt. Life is going to suck. Why even bother? But if you know something's coming, like if you go to the gym to build your muscles, you're going to be sore when you're done. That's part of growing your muscles. It doesn't mean that you expect that all healthy activities are going to hurt. Some of them are going to require some effort. But on the other side of that discomfort is increased strength. And that's kind of how I see the situation that you're referring to. Is you see it's coming, it's part of the process, you experience it, you push through it, you get on the other side, and you're stronger. So you're looking at it as an opportunity to become stronger, as an opportunity, as opposed to an opportunity to simply be hurt.
Right. And I want to offer an interesting example here, which is in relationships, in romantic relationships. So I was dating someone, and then I really felt like at one point, this is not going to work out. This is just not going to happen. And we were going to be going on a 2-week trip in Peru in the jungle, and I was leading a group, and I invited her along. But still, now I'm like, oh no, now I really feel like I need to break up with her. And she's going to meet me in the jungle in 2 days, and we're going to be in this like area of the Amazon where she won't have any ability to leave. I mean, and I'm leading a group. This is going to be horrible. How am I going to be dealing with this situation? And that just was scaring me a lot, And when we got there, at first, I was like a little bit more distant, but I didn't know how to properly bring this up, right? And then eventually, one evening in the early part of the trip, I like brought all this, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'm not sure how I feel anymore. There's all this intensity that's happening in my life, and she was actually very understanding. And she listened, and she told me later that was like really hard for her to do, but she was like able to listen and be present and hold space as I was expressing all of this. And then we actually built a really strong connection during that trip. And to my surprise, we actually got married later on.
Wow, how about that?
And that seemed like it would be initially, right, a horrible experience. And then this actually led me to build sufficient intimacy with a person that we decided to get married.
Gotta love those little serendipitous moments, huh?
And now though it gives her to say, well, remember when we were in the jungle, in a loving way, but it's just pretty funny. But yeah, I think what you're saying is right. Is like if we only focus on the pain and the hurt, then that's only what we're going to see, right? And before that, I was only seeing how that would be so challenging to even discuss that with her. But all of these other beautiful things came out of that, which I was not seeing.
So something about that experience widened your lens. So you weren't just caught up in all those reasons why you thought you should break up with her.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things that I think is magical about this is I have always been challenged in the past with intimacy in relationships. And I feel like because the connection was so strong, that's what was scaring me. And then this is what made me want to pull out of the relationship. It was like out of my comfort zone.
One thing I suspect that ultimately helped you in that situation is, and I talked about this a little bit in our conversation, is being the explorer, being open to new experiences. You're in that sense of wonder and that sense of judgment really goes into the background. So as you were exploring things in Peru and you were seeing her through that lens, I suspect that a lot of that judgment just kind of faded in the background, and you saw how magnificent it was to be an explorer with her, to be going through that sense of discovery, and you saw her through a totally new light.
Yeah, this is. I feel this is very accurate, and that different context allowed me to adopt a different frame of like an operating system almost, right? So actually, now that I'm mentioning operating system, is that in a way part of what mindfulness does in that type of work is help us evolve how we view ourselves in the world?
Well, a lot of mindfulness is being aware of the operating system that's chattering in the background, because there seem to be some default mechanisms in the way our mind works and the kind of thoughts it produces, and learning to become an observer of that. Being able to see that, like I mentioned earlier, that protective nature, that, oh, don't do that, oh, stop it, oh, that's going to hurt. And just realizing, yeah, of course my mind does that. It wants to keep me alive. It wants to protect me, but it doesn't mean that it's the absolute authority on everything I want to put my effort into. So getting to understand the operating system and its nature is very, very important, as otherwise it can derail you in certain situations where it shouldn't have that much say in the matter.
Well, do you feel like we're understanding it better, or does it change? Because those are two different concepts. It might be both or it might be not. But what's your take on it?
Do you mean people in general? Are we getting better at it?
No, I mean the operating system. Because I can recognize, right, the operating system behind me and just getting like really knowing it in very much detail and recognizing it. Or it can also perhaps be evolving. And those are two different concepts.
I think that our world is, just because of the things I choose to pay attention to in the world, I think there is a segment of our population that is seeking out a higher level of consciousness. One that is much more purpose-driven, that's much more in service of seeing how we are all connected, that's based more on love than fear, because that protective instinct comes from fear. So I think we have the potential through our own efforts to become much more open and less resistant to life. So I think, absolutely we have the potential of changing that essential nature in ourselves.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And even if we look back, right, I'm sure that let's say 2,000 years ago, we were not necessarily operating, like it wasn't necessarily the same operating system, or 10,000 years ago, or, or if we project in the future, in extreme times, let's say we survive as a race in 50,000 years, well, the operating system, like the likelihood of that being the same, I feel is like, no, like that's almost, well, especially the operating system that is dominant right now. I mean, there's so much aggression in it that if we do survive in 50,000 years, I believe it will have had to change.
Yeah, our leadership in this world tends to be driven much more by fear and greed. And that's why we have these wars going on. That's why we have these big divides between the wealthy and the poor, is this ever nurturing of greed and anger and fear. And I think those of us that are coming much more from that place of love and generosity will hopefully be able to close those gaps by showing the world that when we look at each other as brothers and sisters instead of adversaries, then there's a greater opportunity for everyone to be happy. I'm not talking in a utopian sense of happiness, but feel like their needs are met, they're taken care of, they have an opportunity to contribute their gifts to society. That's what I hope everything is moving towards.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds pretty good to me. I give my vote to that. And see, one of the aspects that I found myself is when we're going through periods of transitions, when we're facing those really hard challenges, or perhaps we're looking for meaning, then those are opportunities where I feel one is those fear and potentially greed, but not necessarily as much, but a lot of the fear, the anger, some of the quote-unquote negative spectrum of emotions tends to flare up a lot more, confusion, uncertainty as well. But those are the times when, with the right guidance, and that can be by ourselves or with other people. I mean, I certainly work with people in that particular transition space, but we can bring our awareness to these aspects and then see the truth behind it. And then through that, start changing the way that we operate. It's like once we get intimate with anger, fear, rage, and confusion and all of those pieces, then we understand it. And then paradoxically, we're not as afraid of it if we're able to really sit with it and work with it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I recently, the Zen master that I study under, his teacher was in town, and she did a lecture of sorts at the Zen Center that I attend. And one thing she said was pointed at exactly what you just said, is when you have any kind of emotion that comes up, fear, anger, sadness, ask yourself, what is this feeling wanting? Because those feelings are an indication that there is an unmet need. You're angry because you feel something's missing. What is this anger wanting? And then you can spend time seeing that it's a need that I have that's being unmet. But usually when you're caught up in the emotion itself, it can consume you and you don't even realize why you're having it. You're just afraid, you're just sad, you're just angry. Instead of realizing that I have an empty pitcher here that needs to be filled. And if I'm able to get this need met, then I will move from that suffering more to love. Or maybe the solution is acceptance or letting go as opposed to getting something. You've experienced a loss, therefore you're angry or sad. Maybe the solution isn't getting it back. Maybe the solution is realizing that you're wanting something that's no longer there, and you just need to allow yourself to grieve it and be grateful that it was ever there to begin with. And once you've grieved it, you can let go of that anger or that hurt. And now there's room for love again.
I want to connect the dots because, you talked about mindfulness and that bringing resilience. And I can certainly see how resilience can help us do the process that you just suggested. But still, someone might be listening and say, well, how is it that if I pay attention and I really focus in on what's happening when I'm eating my food and the flavors and the textures and all that is going to help me later on in life, maybe when I'm going through a grieving process of a lost one?
Because that is the practice of being present with what's happening now. When you're grieving someone, you're thinking in terms of, I want it back. I want it to be like it was in the past. I want to be able to have in the future what I've always had. Jumping back and forth between past and future is not being mindful. Being mindful is being with the present experience you're having. So it teaches you to focus in on what you have as opposed to what you don't have. Being grateful for the experiences you are currently within as opposed to focusing on what's missing. And that's the power of mindfulness. And you can capture that through meditating on your breath, through eating, sitting in a park and feeling the wind going through your hair, listening to the birds chirp, just being grateful for that moment. Because the people that spend a lot of time grasping or wishing for the things that are no longer there are missing everything that's around them in the moment that is ripe for gratitude.
I agree with you on that one. That was beautifully said, and I'm glad that we made that connection, because I think it's important that we realize that these little actions, these small practices, this ability to really cultivate our awareness in the present moment will help us regardless of what we're experiencing. And it almost becomes, I feel like, not necessarily help, but lead us into a place of constant enjoyment. You know, it's like you no longer necessarily need help, but because you are able to enjoy and appreciate and express that gratitude that you were mentioning for what is.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that negativity or suffering won't sneak in there. It's a part of our experience. You know, it happens because we always have new experiences that we maybe don't have strategies for. I sure as hell was not prepared for cancer. I was not prepared for a divorce. But by going through that experience and doing the work, you discover the tools. You become much more resourceful. So suffering shows up. Doesn't mean you screwed up. It means you now have another opportunity to be resourceful and grow. So welcome those opportunities too, even when they hurt.
Yeah, that's well said. So I want to make sure that people know how to get in touch with you, Brian. So what's the best place for them to go?
The best place to begin is my website, which is brianraymondking.com.
Okay, that's pretty simple. And see, in the introduction, me and trying to be clever, I said Ray, which is the short-standing form of Raymond, at least I presume. But then I'm like, oh no, that just added confusion because it's fully spelled out. So brianraymondking.com. Okay, that's awesome. And I'm going to be including this with the show notes as well. So if you're not able to write it down in this precise moment, then you'll be able to go back and check that out. And I also want to offer you a chance to present a closing word to our audience. Is there anything that you would like to share with them?
In addition to what we've already said, well, one mantra that I recommend for people in service of moving from suffering to love is every now and then throughout the day, as you're having a moment to focus on your breath, you take a deep breath in and you say to yourself, I love me. As you breathe out, you say, I love you. So that the motion of your breathing is circulating love through your heart, out of your mouth. And if you can come from that place all day long, or as much as possible, more often than not, you can really shift the experience you have of life.
That's actually a mirror of one of our guests had what he had shared. Mark Rist, I think it was in episode 10, and he was talking about his was ecstasy through Christ, but one of his main practices was breathing in and out a prayer.
Yeah, it's a wonderful practice.
Yeah, so that's why when you're sharing this, it's like, yes, and it's interesting to see, too, the connections, because he came at it from another angle, but it's essentially the same practice.
Yeah. So many of our belief systems have that universal root, that universal foundation in wanting to put more love into the world.
It was an honor to have you here. I appreciate that. And I mean, even myself, I learned a lot through it. And even as you were talking about the mindfulness, I'm like, okay, Paul, like, be really focused in on what he's saying and, you know, just trying to be as present as possible. And I love this because when I'm able to directly apply what we're talking about as we're talking about it, or for you listening, I mean, as you're listening to this, every single moment is an opportunity to practice. I find this is just great, and this is where it brings really a lot of value. And I mean, our mission at The Spiritual Voice is really to be able to have a life that is meaningful, to have relationships that are fulfilling, so that we can bring into our world the change that we desire. This is something that we all possess within ourselves, and it's a matter of choice. And I mean, obviously, we have wonderful tools, and we have experts like Brian that help point out to there. But this is something that is within you, and there is no need to wait for something else to happen. So I do invite you to check out Brian's website for sure. I know that there's a lot of great resources there that will help you. And I also invite you to check out The Spiritual Voice and discover what may be able to help you on your process for meaning, fulfillment, happiness, joy, and connecting with other spiritually inclined people. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you.
Today's episode was brought to you by the Spiritual Voice community, where heart-centered seekers connect to build meaningful relationships, grow their spiritual practice together, and celebrate life to rediscover what it means to laugh and smile every day. Head over to thespiritualvoice.com for full recaps of every show, our amazing resources, and to join the Spiritual Voice community today.